All right. Some of you weren't with us last Sunday. Last Sunday we started talking about the Sabbath. It comes from the Ten Commandments, one of those foundational commandments. When I grew up, I thought keeping the Sabbath meant go to church every Sunday. That's probably what I learned in confirmation. Keep the Sabbath holy means go to church every Sunday. Certainly, worship can be a very important part of remembering the Sabbath, but I found it to be much more than simply spending an hour on Sunday morning. As I mentioned last week, we have two versions of this, and they're basically the same in Exodus and Deuteronomy. Sort of that bookend, those 40 years in the wilderness, Moses gives them and talks about these 10 commandments. Last week we looked at the Deuteronomy version where he says we've been given the Sabbath to remind us that we don't want to fall back into slavery. We need to break this cycle of work. We need to be able to rest, to find our identity in more than simply what we do. Our identity is who we are. When our kids were little, we had hamsters for a while. In fact, we had our own little hamster graveyard in the backyard from all the hamsters we had during those years. It was a fun, educational kind of experience thing, and one of the things they liked to do was run in a wheel. Is that video going to work? Not going to work. I don't think so. I had a great little video of this little guy. You guys have seen hamsters in the wheels and what happens when they're going too fast. The whole hamster goes around. All right. So anyway, we don't have our videos aren't going to work today. So sorry about that. But do you ever feel that way? Sometimes you're running so fast and all of a sudden you just sort of you lose track and you fall and you just find yourself spinning around, or you feel like you're spending all this energy and you're not going anywhere. Well, the reminder that Sabbath is for us is that life is more than work, and it provides time to get perspective. I'm going to read the commandment the way that we find it in Exodus, and so a little bit different view. Listen to the different reason why we have Sabbath, all right? So Moses says this, it says, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work. On the seventh day, it's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave or your livestock or the resident alien who lives in your towns. For 6 days God made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that was in them, but rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. So this is different than the Deuteronomy version. It's not about remembering you're not a slave anymore, but the positive example of God the Creator. If God found it important to rest, then we too should follow God's example. It's not that God was so tired out from all the work that he had done that he needed a break. I think we have to be careful that we don't anthropomorphize God too much, right? Give God human characteristics or attributes. That's making God in our image, not the other way around. But it's hard not to do that. It's hard to relate to something that we can't visualize, or something that doesn't have physical form, which is why we were given Jesus. The book of Colossians has this wonderful verse. It says, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, right? Jesus we can draw a picture of. We know what a human being looks like. But there's lots of varieties in people, and so most of us artists tend to draw Jesus to look like the artist. Different parts of the world picture Jesus differently. But Jesus, when Jesus prayed, he prayed to the Creator as his Father. And so oftentimes we envision the Creator as just being an older version of Jesus, which is not always helpful. Anyway, let me get back. God doesn't... Hello? God doesn't need to rest because God is exhausted by hard work, right? God rests because he wants to enjoy and savor what God has created. That's important to do. I remember when we first got a video camera. It sat on my shoulder, weighed about 15 pounds. You guys remember carrying around the big video camera? And I remember events in my kids' lives because I can watch the video of it, but I was so busy making the video, I don't remember the event itself, right? I was so busy trying to run all the buttons and do all the things that I didn't experience it. Sometimes Sabbath is about just put the camera down, experience what's going on, let the moment sink in. It's one thing to make something. It's very satisfying if you've ever made something to have that, but it's even better to have what you have made be appreciated. For those of you who are parents, we have this sense of awe. I made a human being. You know, what a marvelous thing this is. You look back at these children, especially when they're quiet and sleeping, and we say, we made this. We made this incredible creation, this gift of life. Or it's like when you plant a garden. I mean, there's a sense of accomplishment simply planting a garden. You could plant the garden and walk away and say, I planted a great garden. But joy comes when you walk through it each day and you see how all the different parts are working together and how quickly it's growing and changing and renewing and making new life. I love the passage of Scripture we heard about creation, where it reminds us that we are part of creation. That's why I think spending time out in creation can be so renewing, because it's part of who we are. There's lots of ways to experience creation, and people do it in different ways. But you experience a lake differently if you're on a jet ski or if you're on a canoe, right? Or a snowfall if you're on a snowmobile or if you're snowshoeing. Now, both are fun, and speed can be very exhilarating. But sometimes to really connect, it requires slowing down a bit or Sabbath time. One of the reasons I think Bible camp makes such an impact on our kids is that, well, first of all, it lasts the whole week. It takes a couple days just to get used to being unplugged from all the stuff we have going on and learning how just to slow down a little bit. But once we do, we get to experience being outdoors and being part of something so much bigger than ourselves, and our perspective begins to change. So I'm so excited about creating our outdoor worship space right outside those windows. Pretty soon we're going to be able to look out those windows and we're going to see our memorial garden. Right now we just see the grass that we killed so we can put a garden in. Right now it's just dead grass out there. But soon there's going to be these beautiful reminders of creation. Diane and I just got back from 3 days up on the North Shore, and I would have loved to. I was going to just bring you 30 seconds of North Shore waves lapping on the sand. So it's so peaceful. All right. I'll show it to you next week. All right. But Genesis reminds us that we're not just a part of creation. We are a very special part of creation. That God said, "I'll create you in the image of God." Now, that doesn't mean our physical image, but that we have the characteristics of God, that we are creative, that we are nurturing of creation. Again, if I go back to Colossians, he says, in Christ, this image of the invisible God, he says, all things were created, and in him all things hold together. God just didn't create something and then walk away. He continues to work in and through us. This work of creation is also the work of recreation, again and again. And the point of recreation is to renew us. Sometimes we lose sight of that. We push ourselves so much that we end up feeling exhausted instead of renewed after a time of recreation. Did you ever do that? You play so hard that you need a day of work just to recover a little bit? We have to remember that rest is not necessarily doing nothing. Rest is critical. If we're going to do anything, we have to have that rest first. That's why I believe it's this foundational commandment that God says, this is important, people. You have to rest. before you can do anything. It's like sleep, right? I used to think sleep was a huge waste of time. Now I can't wait, right? Sleep, it looks like nothing is happening, right? But while we're laying there, not aware of anything, our blood flow is increasing, damaged tissues are getting repaired, hormones are being released, our brain plasticity are taking our short-term memories and creating them, making them into long-term memories. All this stuff is going on while we're just laying there in bed. It's sort of, I think about like bulbs too. They bloom, but then all the foliage dies back and it looks like nothing is happening. It looks like, oh, the plant died. But it didn't die. It's storing up energy. It took all that sunlight in and was storing it all up and building itself up so that in the next spring it can bloom again. All right, but how do we keep the Sabbath holy? The word holy simply means you take something and you set it apart for a special purpose. That's all holy really means, is that this is something special. It's like all the commandments. You can frame it in what you should not do, or you can frame it as a positive thing, what we should do. All right? It's more than simply refraining from working. It's about not letting work define us in the first place, right? Money is not the only currency of value we have. More and more, I see time as even a more valuable currency than money. What we do with that time matters. It matters a lot. How we work, or as well as where or how we don't work. It means being intentional about how we recreate, right? Making sure it's doing what it was intended to do, to recreate us, to revive us emotionally and spiritually, physically. Sometimes we disassociate physical from spiritual, and we do that at our great peril because they are powerfully connected. So Jesus could come up to someone and he could say, doesn't matter if I say be healed or be forgiven. He says, it's the same thing. Our body and our spirit are all together. I can say you are forgiven, or I can say be healed. So part of a good Sabbath then is recognizing though this spiritual dimension of our life. And there's many ways to do this. So you can do it by simply having a walk along the North Shore, or it can happen in the midst of a sanctuary, just like we're at right now. God is in no way limited by space or time. But just being there doesn't mean that we're being fed. You can go to the North Shore and still be stressed out. You can sit right here for an hour and have absolutely nothing happen, all right? It's how we bring ourselves, how we open ourselves to mystery, to wonder. This is where the space is created then for us to encounter God. Then this refreshing, life-giving experience of rest in God's presence can be part of us. We can get the band coming back up here. We're going to move into a song here. I find music is a powerful way to bring us to a place of openness for the Spirit to work. If our computer would have been working on the way in, you would have heard Cat Stevens singing "Morning is Broken." You know, and as a teenager, I thought Cat Stevens wrote this song. I thought, oh, "Morning is Broken," great song by Cat Stevens. Then I realized, no, it was written by a woman named Eleanor, who lived 50 years before Cat Stevens. And she wrote children's books. And she wrote a little poem. Her name was Eleanor Fargen. And she composed a poem about creation. And it, about 90 years ago, it got published for the first time, sort of as a hymn. Got published as a hymn, but it makes this powerful creation then between creation and the renewal of our spirits. So we've been sitting for a while. Why don't we rise, sing a little bit, "Morning Has Broken."